Welcome to Beyond the Coverage. I'm Chris Horner. Today's episode, of course, sponsored by Baker Tilly. That's sponsored every episode of the Butterfly Effect and Beyond the Coverage for the Tour de France in 2025. Today is the first vacation day for the riders of the 25 Tour de France, so that means it's Monday after that spectacular race around the Champs and up Mont Martrade there, as we saw a spectacular Stage 21 that Wout van Aert won and toppled everybody there. Now we go into Visma bike, Jonas Vingegaard's interviews after the Tour de France. I want to cover their team and talk about Jonas Vingegaard's post-interview after the Tour de France, where he tries to explain why the Tour de France did not go so well for him. And he did say in there that he saw some of the best numbers that he has produced. So there's a little bit of sunshine, but he had some bad days. He explains that it's the bad days that cost him the Tour de France. I believe when you're looking at Visma bikes, Jonas Vingegaard, it's the not exceptional, fantastic days that lost him the Tour de France. So you can look at it other ways. You can look, say, just like Jonas Vingegaard with the 3 stages, we start looking at the individual time trials where he lost a minute and 10 seconds thereabouts to Poggi, and then he lost another 36 seconds up the uphill time trial. That put it at almost 2 minutes, and then you start looking at 2 minutes and 10 seconds on Oudecombe. I mean, we're talking almost 4 minutes right there. But 4 minutes is still a doable time if you had some exceptional day at the Tour de France that caused Tadej Pogačar to blow up spectacular, like we saw in 2022 when we went up Col de Granon and he just fell apart. Now, I explained and I've covered that video many times. It's a spectacular video. I mean, it's the video that gives and keeps giving when you're talking about making content up on Beyond the Coverage. But that day I told you that Poggi had just bonked. And why did he bonk? Well, we go up over the climbs when it was all said and done, and you're coming down in the valley when you're coming off Col de Telegraph and you're coming down into the valley. You know at that moment that Poggi was isolated. It gets a little bit stressful if you're Tadej Pogačar to understand that you got to start putting in some calories. His teammate, Rafael Majka, didn't come back into the picture till close to Col de Granon starting proper, and Poggi bonks while going up the climb. Lost some time there, got behind the race leader's yellow jersey, and then he started having to get into panic mode and making up time. But in 2022, Poggi did not have an exceptionally strong team. In fact, it was falling apart at the seams. It started falling apart from stage 1 even, when they had to rotate riders out of the rotation there, the team rotation, when they had to bring in Mark Hershey, who was just coming off of COVID, so he was under. And then riders were having knee issues, they were crashing, Soler was sick, the team was falling apart. So Poggi had no help to put pressure on Jonas Vingegaard, so he had to do it himself. Yes, I know Brandon McNulty did some spectacular rides in the mountains, but overall, in general, he didn't have that super domestique. So Visma bikes Jonas Vingegaard, when we start talking about the 25 year, the biggest problem they had is they were always trying to isolate Tadej Pogačar. Stage 1, splits with 20 kilometers to go, 40 riders going up the road. Visma bikes driving it on the front, but Poggi's not really working all that hard. Tadej Pogačar's back there rotating through, but having a good time, basically. Yes, at times he's isolated throughout the 25 Tour de France, but the problem with isolation that a lot of commentators don't tell you, or a lot of content YouTube's people like myself, I like to tell you that it's not just isolation. Isolation is just the first part of a 2-part problem that you have to get through. First, you have to isolate a rider like Tadej Pogačar, which Visma bike had made happen throughout the 25 Tour de France, but what they didn't do is the next step, which is really important. I told you the next step on Beyond the Coverage the week before the Tour de France started is the most important step. You have to get Tadej Pogačar on the front at some point in time for a substantial length of time. That's where Visma bike failed. Jonas Vingegaard, of course, with the 3 days of bad form and then the 0 days of spectacular form at the Tour de France, is another hit there for Visma bike. But in general, Jonas' form at the 25 Tour de France was solid. I mean, not spectacular when you compare Jonas to Jonas in years past, but it was still solid that if their team had gotten Poggi isolated, if he had had some bad luck, if he had had a mechanical, if he had crashed somewhere, Jonas wins the Tour de France. I mean, he's second on the general classification when it's all said and done. So you don't have to be too brilliant to understand that once Poggi is isolated, if he has some bad luck, they win. But if you can't have bad luck to Tadej Pogačar, if he doesn't forget to eat, if he doesn't crash, if he doesn't, of course, have a mechanical at the wrong point in time, getting him isolated will not do it for you. what that first week of racing did at the 25 Tour de France for Visma Lease bike, racing way too aggressive, what that did is isolate Poggi and Jonas Vingegaard on first and second of the general classification. So they did isolate, but they isolated the two guys on first and second on general classification. Then later, when we start getting into the second and third mountain stages of the 25 Tour de France, when other riders behind that would have been a threat on general classification, such as when Lipovitz was going up the road and he's attacking, Poggi didn't panic. Now, if you'd have taken 2022 and 2021 Poggi, he would have panicked. Tadej Pogačar, UAE team members would have absolutely had panicked when Lipovitz was going up the road and Tadej Pogačar was isolated from the pace of Visma Lease bike on the penultimate climb on that stage when Lipovitz attacked and went up the road. They may have even panicked when it was Jorgensen going up the road with Ben O'Connor. At that moment, with Ben O'Connor, Rubio, and Jorgensen going up the road, in the old days, UAE team members would have panicked and Tadej Pogačar would have followed that move. But I told you guys on Beyond the Coverage before the Tour de France started proper that Poggi that we're seeing here in the 25 season does not fall for those tricks anymore. So we go back to the first week where Visma Lease bike overextended themselves and isolated on the general classification two riders, first and second. That means Jonas sitting second on the general classification. He has no help from any of the other teams. He needs help from the other guys on general classification when you get into the first mountain stages. And once Remco Evenepoel blew up and dropped out of the Tour de France, that took away that other rider that could have put pressure on Pogačar back there. But instead, he dropped out. Now we're isolated, two guys on the general classification. So Poggi's wise enough now at his age to understand that all I got to do is follow Visma Lease bike. You want to send Jorgensen up the road with Ben O'Connor and Rubio from Movistar? Go ahead. Lipovitz wants to attack up the road? Go ahead. Let him go. Let's see what Jonas is going to do while Lipovitz is going up the road. So Poggi just sat back there on Jonas Vingegaard and rode into the mountain stages with Visma Lease bike pulling him around. Now, again, when we start looking at the interview, the post-interview from Jonas Vingegaard talking about he's seen his best numbers. Well, I'd like to see what those numbers are and compare them to myself, because when you look overall, was Jonas good? I already said he was good. He was second on general classification, so he was spectacular. And a shout out, a tip of the hat right here on Beyond the Coverage to Jonas Vingegaard, because without Jonas Vingegaard, this race would not have been as exciting. So I love that Jonas Vingegaard comes into the Tour de France with this kind of form, but tactically it would have been wiser to go through that first 10 stages of the Tour de France, keeping all of the general classification riders as close to first place on general classification as you possibly can. Because of your Visma Lease bike, that means you don't have to race the whole first 10 stages the first week of the Tour de France, difficult-wise. Hopefully you have all the guys on the general classification a bit closer, but instead you have Simon Yates that gets split off on stage one, so they're losing guys on Visma Lease bike to be able to attack Tadej Pogačar. He doesn't care if you're going to isolate him and not actually get him in the win. So the biggest problem when we look at Jonas Vingegaard again is that they don't understand tactically where they're at. Their tactic that they employed throughout the Tour de France of pulling Tadej Pogačar throughout the first 10 stages and a bunch of stages after the first 10, but especially through the first 10, was that unless you are better than Tadej Pogačar, it doesn't do any good to go into a mountain stage and pull the best climber in the world that has better form than Jonas Vingegaard. The only thing that can possibly do is then you have to hope for Tadej Pogačar to have some kind of mechanical sickness or something like that to come into play, some bad luck basically. And that never happened. So the biggest thing when you look at the interviews is you got to remember that the not exceptionally good day is why Jonas Vingegaard lost the Tour de France. Yes, the 3 bad days helped him lose the Tour de France too, but he never had a day where he outperformed Tadej Pogačar throughout the 25 Tour de France. And in fact, if you want to go into all the final mountain stages, it's only the last mountain stage where Jonas Vingegaard put only a few seconds in the Tadej, because of course he knows the race is over at the 25 Tour de France. He doesn't have to follow Jonas on that final mountain stage, and he gives him a few seconds to go up to the line. But other than that, Tadej Pogačar was never a threat. One last thing before we end up here on Jonas Vingegaard's post-interview here. When he says that, well, okay, his numbers were the best. they may have been the best, but he didn't post them up. But if they were the best, the other thing that we don't know about Tadej Pogačar is that after he gets himself 4 stage victories and we come into the final week of racing at the Tour de France, Pogi knew he does not have to race every summit finish all out. And he does not have Almeida with him. If UAE Team Emirates still had Almeida that crashed in the first week on the Mur de Bretagne stage down the backside, if he had had Almeida still, we may have seen Tadej Pogačar winning 2 more stages, no problem, and we could have possibly seen something else happen even on the final day of the Champs if the whole team was a bit fresher. But the whole team, when we started on stage 21, was a completely different team because we know Tadej Pogačar was isolated coming into the final laps there when they had to go up Montmartre there. So we go into that mind of thinking, you got to believe that Tadej Pogačar could have gained even more time on Jonas Vingegaard if he absolutely had to, but he was never put under pressure. So it'd be a mistake if you're Visma Lease bikes Jonas Vingegaard to think that, wow, I only have to be a little bit faster and then I could be up there with Tadej Pogačar, because we don't know exactly how good Tadej Pogačar could have been because he was never put under any stress at all throughout the 25 Tour de France. Okay, I want to cover one more thing with Visma Lease bike. I want to go into Wout van Aert on stage 21. What happened with the big guy? How did he come into stage 21 and put on such a show? You know I love the big guy. I have him number 5 on my top first page, and there's only 6 riders on my first page. Poggi, Primoz Roglic, Jonas Vingegaard, Remco Evenepoel, and Wout van Aert, and then Mathieu van der Poel. I know you guys are going to leave me some hate stuff there with Mathieu van der Poel being 6, but I'd take Wout van Aert over Mathieu van der Poel every day of the week. Although I would love to have Mathieu van der Poel, don't get me wrong. And Mathieu van der Poel keeps getting sharper and sharper with his skills, especially his lead-out skills to Jasper Philipsen. But we'll stick on Wout van Aert for sake of this video. When we go into stage 21 and we see Tadej Pogačar lighting up the race there, the first time up Montmartre there, we know that he splits it to a group of about 30. When they're doing the final circuit, it's about 17 kilometers long, so they got about 17K to come around before they come up the climb again. And Poggi is getting aggressively attacked, but the group of 30 is holding everything together. We come into the second time up the climb, and we know Poggi splits it again. We got 6 riders in the front group. Now, when we see this front group, the biggest thing you got to pay attention to is that Poggi is having some help from all 5 riders in that group of 6. They all have to rotate through with Tadej Pogačar at this moment because the group behind of about 25 riders is chasing full gas back there to try to bring them back. So they can't play any games with Tadej Pogačar while they're doing the 15 kilometers of the course there before they come back up to Montmartre. When they get near Montmartre, we start seeing that it's Jorgensen throwing in some attacks and playing some Saturn sit-up tricks back there with Tadej Pogačar and making him earn to stay in the front group as Jorgensen's throwing attacks. I told you guys on the butterfly effect I didn't like these attacks. Now, everything in cycling has tiny little moments that can change whether or not if I accept tactics, like them or not like them. When we look at that final lap there before they come up the second to last time there, we know that, like I said, all 6 work together. They can't attack before, and where they are attacking so close to the climb starting again, I don't like that tactic because we know Jorgensen and we know Wout van Aert, who is a sprinter, were capable of following Poggi the lap before. So that means if you're coming up to the final climb here with those 6 riders and you're so close to the final climb and you see Jorgensen attacking 4 different times playing games, attacking 3 times, 1 time playing some games off the back where he's separating Poggi from the back of the group, so letting the 4 go up there and Poggi has to come around. But he also spent 1 kilometer on the front. Now, when both riders went over the top with him, just the pass before, if you think about it, if Poggi attacks going up the climb the final time of Montmartre, well, we already saw Wout stay with them, and we saw Jorgensen stay with him. Now, you come in the last time, you don't know exactly how Tadej Pogačar's form is, but we know he's the #1 ranked rider in the world. We know he's a 4-time Tour de France champion, and so you would expect when he's going up the climb, he's going to ride into the climb and up the climb, which does what? It puts Tadej Pogačar on the front of the group. It allows Wout van Aert a few hundred meters before the climb to sit on his wheel, and if Jorgensen had come into that climb, possibly the pace is just a tad bit slower, which allows Jorgensen and the big guy Wout van Aert to be completely rested. Whenever you're a big guy the size of Wout van Aert and a classic specialist, you can never be afraid going into a cobblestone climb with fresh legs, especially against a rider as the size of Tadej Pogačar. Now, we know he's Tadej Pogačar. I've said it many times. But if you go into one climb early in the classics, if you go into 2 climbs early in the classics, you go into 3 climbs, and you're only racing for, 50 miles? Then you got to believe that Wout van Aert is the stronger of the 2 riders. And of course, we know Tadej Pogačar had to do a bunch of the climbing stages following Jonas Vingegaard. So when Wout comes into that climb, I would have been happy starting that climb with Wout and Jorgensen starting as fresh and relaxed as you possibly can, and then hoping to follow the wheel of Pogi going over the top. Now, of course, we saw Wout van Aert attack, drop Tadej Pogačar going up the climb, and then solo into the stage, which, remember, if you go back to my tactic, not having Jorgensen on the front, and again, if you could attack earlier on that circuit, I'm okay with that, but the group behind's too close. So when you're attacking going up the climb, you have to make sure your legs are something especially good, and we saw that Wout van Aert was as he dropped Tadej Pogačar going over top and then soloed and won that stage. So did we really see Wout van Aert's level come up to what we have seen in years past, especially when we're talking about 22 Tour de France? I'm not so certain, and it's too difficult to tell. Could be that Pogi's legs had come down, but if we look at that stage, there was lots of times where Tadej Pogačar was being careful through the corners, opening up gaps. That means he has to spend a lot of energy to close those gaps. I agree with his tactic. Open up the gap, stay safe. You're wearing the race leader's yellow jersey for the 4th year. You're going to win it. So I agree. Spend some energy, go safe through the corners, close it, but it's costing him energy. And when we look at Wout van Aert having extra strength left at the end of that stage to drop Tadej Pogačar, you got to understand that it's really only about 80 kilometers of racing, which is about, call it 50 miles of racing. So a big guy like Wout van Aert would not have been as fatigued from this stage as a rider like Tadej Pogačar that was closing all those gaps back there. Anyways, when it's all said and done, we're not certain. I personally cannot tell you if Wout van Aert's level has gone back up to that something extraordinary level again, or if it was just the fact that, guys, it was a short stage. And when it's a short stage and a short classic stage, it's always going to benefit a rider like Wout van Aert over a smaller size rider like Tadej Pogačar. Either way, it was a spectacular racing, and the sprinters may never get a sprint stage again for stage 21 of the Tour de France if it's up to the organizers and the fans that are watching stage 21, because it was a magical day. Congratulations, Wout van Aert. Fantastic. Jonas Vingegaard, you know I love you. If you weren't there, there would not have been as exciting Tour de France as what we got to see in 2025. So like and subscribe, guys. I'll see you guys on the next Butterfly Effect or Beyond the Coverage real soon.